The rain pelted against the windows of Millfield House with a vengeance that matched Miss Nora Mayfield's mood. She stabbed her needle through the helpless linen with unnecessary force, imagining each puncture as a minor victory against the prison of her circumstances. "Nora, you'll tear the fabric if you continue with such enthusiasm," her mother chided from across the drawing-room. "A lady's needlework reflects her temperament. Yours suggests a storm." "Perhaps because there is one, both outside and within," Nora replied, not bothering to temper the edge in her voice. At 22, she had endured 5 London seasons, each more dispiriting than the last. Not for lack of offers, there had been 3, but for want of something no one seemed to understand, choice. Lady Mayfield sighed. "Your father's patience wears thin. Lord Pennington has expressed interest again." "Lord Pennington expresses interest in anything in skirts under 30, Nora muttered. "His interest is as consistent as it is insincere. He offers security, which is more than your clever remarks will provide when your father and I are gone." Nora set down her embroidery. "Marriage is a business transaction, Mother. I understand this. But must the terms be so wholly unfavorable to me?" Lady Mayfield's expression softened. "Not every match is like mine and your father's. Some grow into affection. And some grow into quiet desperation," Nora countered. "I've seen enough unhappy wives to know that marriage without respect is a slow death of the spirit." "Then what would you have us do?" "Your father's investments have not yielded as expected." "Your dowry is—" Lady Mayfield hesitated. "Insufficient for a love match, yet adequate for an old man seeking a nursemaid or a young rake requiring funds," Nora finished bitterly. "I understand our circumstances perfectly, Mother." Later that evening, as Nora dressed for yet another ball, she studied her reflection with critical eyes. Her chestnut hair was arranged simply, a gown of pale blue muslin modest and unremarkable. This season, with funds dwindling, new gowns had been out of the question. Her mother had insisted they attend regardless. The Mayfields could not afford to disappear from society entirely. "No one will notice you in that ancient thing," a younger sister Lydia complained, breezing into the room in a new creation of apricot silk. "You look like a governess." "Perhaps that is my aim," Nora replied coolly. "To disappear entirely and avoid another evening of pretending interest in gentlemen who speak only of hunting and horses." "You're impossible," Lydia huffed. "There's no pleasing you. If a duke proposed tomorrow, you'd find fault with his cravat." Nora smiled despite herself. "Only if it were tied poorly." The Countess of Harewood's annual spring ball was, as expected, a crush of perfumed bodies, desperate mothers, and eligible bachelors affecting boredom while carefully assessing dowries and connections. Nora entered with practiced indifference, her eye sweeping the room out of habit rather than interest. "The usual assortment," she murmured to her mother. "I count 3 newly arrived fortune hunters, 2 widowers above 60, and at least 5 young men who will inherit nothing but their father's gambling debts." "Nora," her mother hissed. "Smile, for heaven's sake." Obediently, Nora arranged her features into what she hoped resembled pleasure rather than a grimace. She allowed herself to be led through the crowd, nodding at acquaintances and exchanging pleasantries, all the while thinking of the book awaiting her return, a far more stimulating companion than any gentleman present. "Lady Mayfield, Miss Mayfield." The Countess greeted them with practiced warmth. "How delightful you could attend. And may I present the Earl of Thornfield? Only just returned from the continent." Nora looked up, expecting another forgettable face, and instead found herself trapped in the most penetrating gaze she had ever encountered. The Earl was tall, his shoulders broad beneath an impeccably tailored dark blue coat. His features were striking rather than handsome, a strong jaw, aristocratic nose, and eyes of such an unusual grey they appeared almost silver in the candlelight. "Lord Thornfield, my daughter, Miss Nora Mayfield," her mother said with a note of unmistakable interest. The Earl bowed. "Miss Mayfield." Just 2 words, yet something in his voice, a deep timbre with the slightest hint of amusement, sent an inexplicable shiver down Nora's spine. "My lord," she curtsied, annoyed to find her voice slightly unsteady. "Thornfield has only just inherited," the Countess explained, clearly delighted to be making such an introduction. "His uncle, the previous Earl, passed rather suddenly last autumn." "My condolences on your loss," Nora offered automatically. A flash of something, grief, perhaps, or guilt, crossed his face so quickly she might have imagined it. "Thank you, Miss Mayfield. Though I confess the title sits uncomfortably. I was raised with no expectation of inheriting." "The 3rd son of a 3rd son," the Countess elaborated. "Quite the unexpected elevation." "How fortunate for you," Nora said, then immediately regretted the words which sounded more cynical than she'd intended. But rather than taking offense, the Earl's mouth curved slightly. "Fortune is rarely what it appears, Miss Mayfield. I find responsibility a heavier burden than obscurity." Before she could respond, the musicians began the opening notes of a country dance. To her astonishment, the Earl inclined his head toward her. "Would you honor me with this dance, Miss Mayfield?" Her mother's elbow discreetly nudged her ribs. "I would be pleased to, my lord." As they took their positions, Nora noticed the open curiosity of those around them. The Earl of Thornfield was clearly this season's most coveted prize, wealthy, titled, and unmarried. That he had chosen to dance with her, in her simple gown and without a notable dowry, was causing a minor sensation. "You seem amused, Miss Mayfield," he observed as they circled each other. "Do I? Perhaps I'm contemplating how quickly the tongue forms opinions based on a single dance." "And what opinion would that be?" "That you are either exceptionally charitable or exceptionally uninformed about society, my lord." His eyebrows rose. "Charitable. To dance with a lady of modest means and unremarkable appearance," she explained. "Particularly when half the diamonds of the season are present and eagerly awaiting your attention." Instead of responding immediately, he studied her with disconcerting intensity as they separated for the figures of the dance. When they came together again, he leaned slightly closer than propriety strictly allowed. "You are many things, Miss Mayfield, but unremarkable is not among them." The dance separated them again before she could formulate a response. When they next joined hands, she found her pulse inexplicably quickened. "You speak very directly, my lord." A habit acquired abroad. In Constantinople, one quickly learns that excessive civility merely prolongs negotiations. "Am I being negotiated with?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. His smile was slow and deliberate. "I believe I am the one being interrogated." The music drew to a close, and he returned her to her mother with perfect courtesy. But as he bowed over her hand, he murmured so only she could hear, "You are mine." The words, delivered with quiet certainty rather than possession, left her momentarily speechless. Before she could recover, he had disappeared into the crowd, leaving her to face her mother's barely contained excitement and a flurry of speculative glances. "What did he say to you?" Lady Mayfield demanded when they had a moment of privacy. "Nothing of consequence," Nora lied, the words still echoing in her mind. "You are mine." Not a question or an invitation. A statement of fact, as though he had recognized something in her that she herself could not yet see. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. Nora danced with 2 other gentlemen, both of whom seemed terribly dull in comparison to the Earl. She searched for him repeatedly, only to catch glimpses as he fulfilled his social obligations, dancing with the host's daughter, conversing with elderly dowagers, exchanging pleasantries with gentlemen of influence. Not once did he approach her again, and by the time they departed, Nora had convinced herself that his words had been nothing more than a practiced line delivered to countless women before her. "The Earl seemed quite taken with you," her mother observed in the carriage home. Nora gazed out at the darkened streets of Mayfair. "The Earl was merely being polite to a wallflower, mother. I wouldn't read more into it." "He danced with you first," Lydia pointed out. Everyone noticed. "And then he danced with Lady Harewood's daughter, Mrs. Pembroke's niece, and the Viscountess Derby's eldest. I was merely one among many." But later, alone in her bedchamber, Nora found herself replaying their brief encounter. There had been something in his eyes, a recognition, an assessment, that suggested he had seen past her carefully constructed indifference. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. 3 days later, the Mayfield household was thrown into chaos by the arrival of an elegant calling card, followed shortly by the Earl himself. "Lord Thornfield to see Miss Mayfield," the butler announced with poorly concealed astonishment. Nora, who had been reading in the morning room, looked up in genuine surprise. She had convinced herself their interaction had been insignificant, a momentary diversion for him, nothing more. "Show him in, Fletcher," Lady Mayfield instructed, smoothing her skirts with nervous hands. The Earl entered with easy confidence, bowing to both ladies. Today he wore a coat of forest green that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the unusual color of his eyes. "Lady Mayfield, Miss Mayfield," he greeted them. "I hope I find you well this morning." "Exceedingly well, my lord," Lady Mayfield replied with transparent delight. "What a pleasant surprise." "I was hoping," he said, his gaze shifting to Nora, "that Miss Mayfield might accompany me for a turn in the park." "With your permission, of course, and a proper chaperone." Nora found her voice at last. "That is very kind, my lord, but unexpected." "Is it?" His expression suggested otherwise. "I believe I made my intentions quite clear at the Harewood ball." "You are mine." The words hung unspoken between them. "I shall fetch my bonnet," Nora said, rising before her mother could answer for her. "And my companion, Miss Winters." Within the quarter hour, Nora found herself walking beside the Earl in Hyde Park, her companion trailing at a discreet distance behind them. The spring sunshine bathed everything in a gentle light, including the Earl's profile, which she studied surreptitiously. "You're staring, Miss Mayfield," he observed without looking at her. "I'm attempting to understand you, my lord." "Thomas," he corrected. "My name is Thomas Irving." "And what is it you wish to understand?" "Why you would single me out." There were a dozen more suitable young ladies at that ball. He considered this as they walked. Suitable by whose measure? Society's. Wealthier families, better connections, prettier faces. "Beauty is common," he replied. "Honesty is rare." "You cannot possibly know if I'm honest." "We've exchanged perhaps 30 words." 57, before today, he corrected. "And I've made my living reading people, Miss Mayfield." In diplomatic circles, one quickly learns to distinguish truth from performance. "Diplomatic circles," she echoed with genuine curiosity. "I spent the last 6 years in service to the Foreign Office. Constantinople, Alexandria, Athens." A shadow crossed his face. "My return coincided with my uncle's death and my unexpected inheritance." "You did not wish to inherit." "I did not wish for my cousins to die," he said quietly. "Edward in the Peninsula. James a fever in India. Their father, my uncle, of a broken heart, they say." Nora's cynicism faltered in the face of his obvious grief. I'm truly sorry. As am I. But their deaths mean I must now do what they cannot, secure the succession. He glanced at her. Which brings us to the purpose of my call. Ah, Nora said, her momentary sympathy cooling. You require a bride. I require an heir, he corrected. For which, yes, a bride is necessary. His bluntness should have offended her. Instead, she found it refreshing after years of veiled intentions and pretty facades. And you've selected me based on, what? A single dance and 57 words. The corner of his mouth lifted. Based on the fact that you were the only woman in that ballroom who wasn't performing a role. The only one who spoke to me as a person rather than a title. That is because I have no illusions about marriage, my lord. I see it clearly for what it is, a practical arrangement for mutual benefit. Thomas, he reminded her. And is that truly what you believe? That marriage offers nothing beyond practicality. For women of my station and circumstances, yes. We marry for security, for position, for the chance to have children within society's blessing. Love is an indulgence few can afford. He stopped walking, turning to face her fully. And yet you refused offers. Nora blinked in surprise. How could you possibly know that? I made inquiries. At her indignant expression, he added, nothing improper. You've had 3 offers in 5 seasons, all declined. Why? Because the cost was too high, she admitted. Security purchased with my freedom and respect seemed poor value. His expression softened. And what would you consider fair value, Nora? The use of her given name should have shocked her. Instead, it felt strangely right on his lips. Honesty, she said after a moment. Consideration. The freedom to speak my mind without fear of disapproval. To be seen as a thinking person, not merely an ornament or a convenience. Those seem reasonable terms, he said. I believe I could meet them. Nora stared at him, comprehension dawning. Are you proposing to me, Lord Thornfield? Thomas, he insisted. And no, not yet. I'm suggesting we come to know each other with the understanding that marriage is my ultimate intention. Why me? She asked again, genuinely bewildered. His gaze was steady. Because in a room full of masks, your face was the only one I could see clearly. Because you speak the truth even when it's inconvenient. Because when I said you are mine, something in you recognized the truth of it, even as your mind rejected the possibility. Heat rose to Nora's cheeks. You are very sure of yourself. I am sure of what I saw, he corrected gently. The question is whether you are brave enough to trust what you felt. Before she could answer, a familiar voice called her name. Turning, Nora saw her father approaching with Lord Pennington, whose oily smile made her stomach clench. Ah, Nora! There you are, her father boomed. And with Lord Thornfield. What a fortunate coincidence. Lord Pennington and I were just discussing you. The older man's gaze slid over her in a way that made her skin crawl. Miss Mayfield. Enchanting as always. Lord Pennington, she acknowledged stiffly. Thomas stepped slightly closer to her side, his presence reassuring. Lord Mayfield, Lord Pennington. A pleasure. Her father looked between them with transparent calculation. Thornfield. Didn't realize you were acquainted with my daughter. We met at the Harewood ball, Thomas said smoothly. Miss Mayfield has graciously allowed me to escort her this morning. Lord Pennington's smile tightened. How fortunate. I had hoped for the same privilege myself. Another day, perhaps, Nora suggested with forced politeness. Indeed, her father agreed. Pennington was just telling me about his new hunter. Magnificent beast, 17 hands. As her father launched into hunting talk, Thomas leaned closer to murmur, "Is Lord Pennington one of your rejected suitors?" "Not officially," she whispered back. "My father has encouraged him, but I've managed to avoid a direct proposal thus far." Something dangerous flickered in Thomas's eyes. "I see." The conversation continued awkwardly until Thomas smoothly extracted them, citing a prior engagement. As they walked away, Nora released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not abandoning me to Lord Pennington's attentions." His expression hardened. "The man is old enough to be your father." "Hence my reluctance," she agreed. "Unfortunately, my own father sees only his wealth and title." "And what do you see when you look at me?" Thomas asked suddenly. "A title? A fortune? A means of escape?" The question deserved honesty. "I see a puzzle," she admitted. "A man who speaks directly but reveals little. Who notices what others miss but guards his own thoughts carefully. Who claims to want marriage yet seeks a woman who has demonstrated little interest in the institution." His laugh was genuine and warm. "Well assessed, Miss Mayfield. Perhaps there's a diplomat in you as well." "There is a realist in me," she corrected. "And she wonders what you're not telling me about your sudden need for a bride." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of respect, perhaps. "Perceptive. Yes, there is some urgency. The terms of my inheritance require me to marry within the year or the estate passes to a distant cousin." "Ah," Nora nodded. "So your interest is not entirely without calculation." "Few decisions in life are," he acknowledged. "But my selection of you is based on what I believe will make the arrangement not merely tolerable but rewarding for us both." It was the most honest proposal, or pre-proposal, Nora had ever heard. No poetry, no pretty lies about love at first sight. Just a clear-eyed assessment of compatibility and mutual advantage. "I appreciate your candor," she said finally. "It's refreshing." "Then will you permit me to continue calling on you?" he asked. "To see if what I believe about our compatibility proves true." Nora considered him carefully. "Yes," she decided. "I will." The weeks that followed transformed Nora's once predictable life into something entirely unexpected. Thomas called regularly, each visit revealing new facets of his character. He brought books they discussed with passionate disagreement. He listened to her opinions with genuine interest. He made her laugh with stories of diplomatic misadventures and observations about the absurdities of London society. Most surprising was his insistence on honesty between them. When she questioned his interest in a serious blue stocking with limited dowry, he admitted that alongside compatibility, he valued her lack of pretension and the fact that she would marry him with clear eyes rather than romantic delusions. "I've seen too many diplomatic marriages crumble when reality failed to match expectation," he explained one afternoon as they walked in her family's small garden. "I would rather begin with truth and discover joy than begin with fantasy and discover disappointment." "A practical approach to matrimony," Nora observed. "I thought that would appeal to you," he said with a hint of a smile. "It does," she admitted. "Though I confess, I find myself wondering if practicality is all that marriage can offer." He stopped walking to study her face. "You're changing your mind about marriage being merely a transaction." "Perhaps," she said carefully. "Or perhaps I'm wondering if some transactions might include unexpected benefits." His eyes darkened slightly. "Such as?" "Companionship. Understanding." She hesitated. "Pleasure." The look he gave her made her breath catch. "I believe all those things are negotiable, Nora." Her name on his lips still sent a thrill through her. After weeks in his company, she had come to anticipate their conversations, to look forward to his visits with an eagerness that both excited and alarmed her. She was developing feelings for him, feelings that complicated her carefully constructed worldview about marriage being merely practical. The situation came to a head at Lady Brampton's midsummer ball. Nora had entered society on Thomas's arm, a statement that had not gone unnoticed. She wore her best gown, still simple compared to many, but the deep emerald color complemented her complexion and brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. "You look beautiful tonight," Thomas murmured as they joined the dancers. "You needn't flatter me," she replied automatically. "There's no one listening." His hand tightened slightly on hers. "I'm not flattering you. I'm telling you what I see." Something in his voice made her look up, and the intensity in his gaze robbed her of words. They moved through the dance in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken thoughts. When the music ended, he led her toward the terrace doors. "I need fresh air," he explained. "Will you join me? Your reputation will survive 5 minutes." Outside, the night air was cool against her flushed skin. Stars glittered overhead, and the distant sounds of music and laughter seemed to belong to another world. "You've been avoiding me all evening," he said without preamble. "I've been right beside you," she countered. "Your body, yes. Your mind has been elsewhere." He turned to face her. "Have I done something to distress you?" The genuine concern in his voice undid her careful composure. "Yes," she admitted. "You've made me question everything I believed about marriage, about connection, about myself." His expression softened. "And this disturbs you?" "Of course it does," she said, frustration bleeding into her voice. "I had reconciled myself to a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience and mutual respect. But now I find myself hoping for more." "What more?" he asked quietly. Nora struggled to articulate feelings she had never expected to experience. "Affection. Passion. Things I've always considered luxuries beyond my station." "They are not luxuries, Nora. They are necessities, at least between us." Her heart stuttered. "What are you saying?" Thomas stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cool night air. "I'm saying that while I approached this arrangement with practicality, I find myself utterly captivated by you. By your mind, your spirit, your honesty." His voice dropped lower. "And yes, by your beauty, which you so stubbornly refuse to acknowledge." "Thomas, I want you as my wife," he continued, "not just to secure my inheritance or provide heirs, but because I cannot imagine spending my life with anyone else. Because when I'm with you, I feel understood. Challenged. Alive." Nora stared at him, searching his face for any sign of insincerity and finding none. "I thought you didn't believe in romantic love." "I believed it impractical for matches of our station," he corrected. "I never said it was impossible." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "I want to marry you, Nora Mayfield. For practical reasons, yes, but also for entirely impractical ones." Before she could respond, the terrace doors opened and Lord Pennington stepped out, followed by Nora's father. "Ah. There you are," Lord Mayfield called, his voice slightly slurred. "Been looking everywhere." Thomas dropped his hand from her face but remained close beside her. "Lord Mayfield. We were just getting some air." "So I see," Pennington said with a sneer. "Quite cozy." "Nora, come inside at once," her father commanded. "Lord Pennington has something to discuss with you." Cold dread washed over her. "Father, now, Nora." Thomas stepped forward. "I believe Miss Mayfield and I were in the middle of an important conversation." "Whatever you have to say can wait," Lord Mayfield retorted. "Pennington here has just offered for Nora's hand. Generous settlement, too. We're to announce it tonight." The world seemed to tilt beneath Nora's feet. "You accepted on my behalf? Without consulting me?" Her father's expression hardened. "It's decided, girl. Our finances are worse than you know. Pennington's offer is our salvation." "I cannot marry Lord Pennington," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her internal panic. "I do not care for him." "Care?" her father scoffed. "What has care to do with it? He can save us from ruin." Lord Pennington smiled thinly. "Come now, Miss Mayfield. I'll be a generous husband. You'll want for nothing." "Except happiness," she replied. "Respect. Basic compatibility." "Ungrateful girl," her father exploded. "After everything we've sacrificed for you, Lord Mayfield," Thomas interrupted, his voice cold with authority. "I must inform you that your daughter cannot accept Lord Pennington's proposal because she has already accepted mine." Silence fell. Nora stared at Thomas in shock, while her father gaped like a landed fish. "That's impossible," Pennington sputtered. "There's been no announcement." "We were about to inform the family," Thomas said smoothly. "In fact, that was the purpose of our private conversation, which you interrupted." Lord Mayfield looked between them suspiciously. "Is this true, Nora?" Nora hesitated only a moment before meeting Thomas's gaze. In his eyes, she saw not just a convenient escape from Pennington, but a promise of partnership, of respect, of a future she had not dared to imagine. "Yes," she said firmly. "Lord Thornfield has asked for my hand, and I have accepted." Her father's expression transformed from anger to calculation. "Thornfield? Well, why didn't you say so?" He glanced at Pennington. "Sorry, old chapter Thornfield's an earl, you understand." Pennington's face darkened with fury. "This is outrageous. The girl was all but promised to me." "Never by me," Nora said quietly. "You'll regret this," Pennington hissed, turning on his heel and storming back inside. Lord Mayfield watched him go with a grimace. "Touchy fellow. No matter. An earl in the family. Capital." He clapped Thomas on the shoulder. "We'll discuss settlements tomorrow, eh?" "Indeed," Thomas agreed, his voice cooling noticeably. "Though I should warn you that Miss Mayfield's happiness is non-negotiable." Once her father had bustled back inside, eager to share the news with Lady Mayfield, Nora turned to Thomas with wide eyes. "You needn't have done that," she said. "I would have found another way to refuse Pennington." "Would you prefer I hadn't?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. "I meant what I said about wanting to marry you, but the timing was rather forced." Relief and joy bubbled up within her. "No, I'm glad you did. Though I would have appreciated a more traditional proposal." Thomas's smile returned. With deliberate slowness, he lowered himself to one knee before her. Taking her hand in his, he looked up with such warmth in his eyes that her breath caught. "Nora Mayfield, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not for convenience or practicality alone, but because I have come to care for you deeply and believe we could build a life of genuine happiness together." Tears pricked her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Rising, he pulled her gently into his arms and kissed her, a kiss that began softly but quickly deepened into something that sent heat coursing through her veins. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "When I first saw you at the Harewood ball," he confessed, "standing apart from the others in your simple gown, watching everything with those intelligent eyes, I knew immediately." "Knew what?" "That you were different. That you were." He smiled slightly. "Mine." Nora laughed softly, remembering his whispered words after their first dance. "You were quite presumptuous." "I prefer to think of it as prescient," he countered. "And I was right, wasn't I?" She reached up to touch his face, marveling at the tenderness she felt for this man who had upended all her practical theories about marriage. "Yes," she admitted. "Though I would never have believed it possible 6 weeks ago." "What changed your mind?" he asked, genuinely curious. Nora considered the question. "You showed me that marriage could be a partnership of equals rather than a surrender of self. That practical considerations and emotional connection aren't mutually exclusive." She smiled. "In short, you proved all my theories wrong." "Not all of them," he corrected. "Marriage is still, in many ways, a practical arrangement. We're simply fortunate enough to have found one that includes affection as well as advantage." "Affection," she teased. "Is that what you call it?" His eyes darkened as he pulled her closer. "For now," he murmured against her lips. "After we're married, I'll show you what else it includes." 6 months later, Nora stood before the mirror in her bedchamber at Thornfield Park, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. Gone was the cynical spinster in modest muslin. In her place stood the Countess of Thornfield, dressed in a simple but elegant gown of ivory silk, her wedding ring catching the light as she adjusted her hair. A knock at the door preceded Thomas's entrance. "Are you ready?" he asked. "The guests are arriving for the Christmas feast." "Nearly," she replied, turning to face him. "Does it ever feel strange to you? How quickly everything changed." He crossed the room to stand behind her, his hand settling on her waist as they both gazed into the mirror. "Some changes are merely recognitions of what was already true," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Like when I saw you enter that ballroom and knew immediately, you are mine." Nora leaned back against him, savoring the solid warmth of his body against hers. "And now I am." "As I am yours," he reminded her. She smiled at their reflection, at the contentment in his eyes and the happiness in her own. Marriage, she had discovered, was indeed a practical arrangement between two people. But when those people truly saw and valued each other, practicality could blossom into something far more profound. "Come, Countess," Thomas said, offering his arm. "Let's go greet our guests." As she placed her hand on his arm, Nora reflected that perhaps her greatest accomplishment was not securing a titled husband or saving her family from financial ruin, but finding the courage to recognize love when it appeared before her, unexpected, unasked for, and utterly transformative.